Hello and welcome. I'm Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UFO, UAP news from everywhere and anywhere. Today, I'd like to talk about something I saw on my dark path. It involves one of Poland's most infamous UFO abductions. On Wednesday, May the 10th, 1978, Wolski woke up at 5 a.m., harnessing a 4-year-old mare to a cart, planning to drive her to the town of Doakiera. They would visit a local farmer with a stallion that would breed with Wolski's mare. Jan Wolski was born in 1907, and after his elementary education, he started farming and living in the village of Emilson, a heavily agricultural area with 74 farms and only one shop until 1978. Walski had never traveled far from his home, other than a brief trip to the Ukraine before World War II, a distance of about 200 miles. After completing their task in the town, Walski and the mayor started their way home. The hour was still early, about 7:20 a.m. They had taken the trip along dirt roads because he didn't have the time to get the mare shod and didn't want to make her walk on a paved road. Today, this is the Lublin Highway, and his extraterrestrial encounter started at this moment. As Wolski and the mayor traveled along the dirt road beneath the trees, they approached the meadow. It was the first time the mayor had walked along most of this route, and at this moment, Wolski observed two persons walking in the same direction as he was going, over the right-hand side of the meadow, and at this time they were about 120 feet away from him. At first, Wolski thought they were hunters, and as the cart entered the meadow, he noted that these figures were walking in a way that made him think that they were waiting for Wolski to get near them. And as he watched the figures, Wolski started to think that they weren't hunters. As he drew closer, he thought the figures had an unusual greenish tinge to their faces, and he also noted something odd about their movement. Their walking reminded him of a film he'd seen about scuba divers and how they moved when walking on the ocean floor. The figures would rise with each footstep before slowly settling back down. Wolski said that when they heard his horse and cart rumbling along, the figures began to turn and look back towards him. And when he got closer, he saw their faces, which appeared green in color. He was surprised, but continued to drive. There is a small stream there, though at the time it was no more than a muddy pool. They tried to jump over the stream, but one of them landed in it. As he drew up to the two figures, they each stepped aside, one to the right and one to the left of his cart, to let him through. And now he heard their voices. And Walski said they were not speaking to him, but rather to each other. He said their language was very bizarre. He didn't know how they could understand one another. He said that when we talk, it's a lot slower, and they spoke very quickly. One report stated that the mayor struggled to pull the cart with the added weight. Apparently, the extraterrestrials got on the cart. Walski said that he wasn't initially afraid of the beings, and it was the first time he was able to observe them up close. The aliens were about 5.5 feet tall, as he'd seen earlier, and they were slim and dressed in elastic one-piece suits of a grayish-black hue that resembled rubber. This suit covered the entire body except for the face and the hands, and at the lower end it included the feet. The suit adhered closely to their bodies except in the waist region, which was less close-fitting, and their suits didn't have buttons, pockets, or a belt, and the ends of the sleeves fitted closely around their wrists. Their heads were large, and their faces were, in fact, green and sported high cheekbones. Their eyes were almond-shaped and very long. Their eyes were also wholly dark, and they did not have whites to the eye. And in place of the nose, there was only a slight bulge with two small vertical openings. Their mouths were straight and thin. Later, Walski noted that the figure grimaced periodically, which he found unpleasant. The movement of their mouths, though, could have just been smiles, and sometimes their mouths would twist to one side. They had no lips, and their teeth were white, and they had no hair, and no hair was visible on their faces. Their hands were green and were slim. They had 5 fingers, and a membrane caused each finger to be webbed. The membrane was green and elastic, connecting each continuous 2 fingers, except for the space between the thumb and the index finger, and it began at the level of the first joint of each finger. Walski did not see that they had fingernails, and at their shoulders the beings had a hump as though a rolled-up blanket had been slipped under their one-piece suits. Walski could not see if this was due to their anatomy or was part of their suit. Lastly, their legs were long and seemed thicker than the legs of a man. Their footwear and the legs of the trousers were fully integrated, and when the creatures were sitting in the cart with their legs hanging down, their legs were curved in such a semicircular fashion that they looked like prehensile limbs. He was so surprised, but not fearful. Wolski drove the cart on another 100 feet or so until they entered a clearing, and at this moment one of the aliens signaled to him to stop in the clearing. What was in front of him shook Wolski. A large white object hung in the air, about 50 feet above the ground, framed by a row of trees. Wolski said that he drove the cart to the bushes, and as he passed them, he noticed a bus in the air. And he said that what was going on was easily visible and was entirely white, like a crystal. The road led him towards the craft, so he tried to speed up and avoid it. Around 60 feet in front of the craft, one of the beings gestured him to stop. He wasn't afraid, so he tried to stop the horse, but it wouldn't quite stop. So one of the beings grasped the reins of the cart and helped him stop it. Not surprisingly, the horse then became a bit uneasy at this movement. So when Wolski entered the clearing, the farmer heard a faint humming sound emitted by the object in the air. At first, the mayor did not want to stop, and one of the beings leapt from the cart and seized the reins, pulling on them to bring her to a halt. And here the figures jumped from the cart, motioning for Wolski to follow one of them. They even helped him get down. Wolski found their skin was soft to the touch, yet quite cold. Wolski also remembered being surprised by the strength that the small being possessed in its wrists. The object was approximately 15 feet long, 9 feet wide, and about 8 feet tall. Wolski likened it to a short bus with a barn-like roof. It had no windows. The object's surface was pristine, free of seams, rivets, or welds. It appeared to him as if it had been cast from a flawless piece of material, and it also gleamed as if nickel-plated. It hovered against a backdrop of tall birch trees, remaining stationary just below their peaks, which ranged between 20 to 30 feet high. Even though the craft was glowing in a transparent white color, it did not cast shadows against the trees behind it. And at each corner of the object, about halfway up, there were 4 barrels with black rods running through them. These rods spun rapidly, and their motion produced a faint but constant hum that Wolski first heard from about 9 feet away. As he approached, the hum grew louder, resembling the humming of bees in flight. The barrels emitted spirals of color, giving the object an ethereal quality, but curiously, the fast-spinning rods did not appear to stir the air. The craft hovered, gently rising and falling. Lastly, a lift platform hovered a few feet off the ground, held by 4 thin, transparent cables, which also shimmered with a pearly nickel-like effect. After being helped off his cart, Walski followed the two beings towards the object. When they arrived nearly beneath it, the lift held by four cables lowered itself noiselessly to the ground. One of the beings stepped into the lift and indicated that Walski should do the same, showing him that he should also grab the cables. The other being did not board the lift, but returned to the horse. The lift rose rapidly into the air, stopping before the opening in the craft. Walski felt nothing as it rose, and it was unclear what made it work. The being who was accompanying him signaled for him to enter. Reportedly, Walski felt some unknown mental prompting that helped him decide to go inside. But before doing so, he stopped before the craft and turned around. From the air, he saw the other being who had remained in the clearing. It was now studying his horse. Before stepping through the opening, Walski paused and braced himself with his right hand against the entrance. It was square but with rounded corners. It was about 6 feet high. At the point where it connected with the wall of the craft, the wall in the door had no visible seam or connection. The door appeared to just roll up inside the craft towards the right-hand side. As he stepped in, Walski's right hand gripped the opening, and he recalled that the walls were at least 1.5 inches thick, but might have even been thicker. Now inside, he was greeted by two more beings, undistinguishable from the first two on the ground. One of them was eating something that looked like an icicle. The being broke the food apart like a biscuit and offered some to Walski. He declined as he gazed at his surroundings. The chamber was rectangular. There was no internal lighting other than the daylight from the open door. The walls, floor, and ceiling were a grayish black. The floor, though, shined as though it were polished. The walls were smooth and hard to the touch and made of a material resembling glass. Seats were fastened against each wall attached by two black cables, and there are reports that differ about the number of seats in the cabin, but there were undoubtedly more seats than the four aliens Walski had observed. Walski did not know whether this chamber was the only one in the craft or whether there were other beings. The height of the ceiling from the floor was about 6 feet high. Two black tubes ran from one wall to the other. Later analysis of Walski's story emphasizes that there must have been something above the ceiling, as the external height of the craft was about 9 feet, and Walski wondered later what might have been up in the loft. Aboard the ship, the humming noise that Walski had heard outside was far less perceptible, and the creatures made no sound as they walked about on the cabin floor. Now acclimated, Walski turned back to the aliens. The one that had come in with Walski indicated he should take off his coat, his jacket, and his shirt. The aliens were in a hurry because one of them helped Walski to unbutton his shirt. There was another alien that came into the cabin several minutes later, arriving while he was undressing. Walski stopped after removing his outer clothing. Then one told him to undress completely, and he started to comply. And while he did so, an expression appeared on the face of these aliens containing at the same time something that Walski felt was both a smile and a grimace. With Walski now completely naked, one of the beings produced two disc-shaped objects, holding one in each hand. It seemed to Walski that they were attached to his palms by something like a suction pad. These gray discs vibrated, emitting a dull humming sound. The alien with the discs moved around Walski rather than having him turn. But either way, during this activity, Walski suddenly became aware that the aliens gave off a powerful smell, something like burning sulfur. The smell was so strong that even 2 days later his coat still smelled strongly of the odor. While undressed, the aliens looked at his clothes spread out on the floor around him. They were particularly interested in his leather trouser belt, alternately unbuckling and buckling it after a superficial exam of the exterior of his body, and they did check out the inside of his mouth. The aliens told him that he could now put his clothes back on. Inside the alien craft, Walski felt the temperature was somewhat warmer. Walski also recalled two other significant events from his time inside the craft. First, one alien who had not been participating in his examination had been walking up and down in the chamber, occasionally putting a small black rod into two holes in one of the walls. The length of the rod was anything from about the size of a pen up to about a foot in length, but all reports state that it had a little black knob at one end. Periodically, the alien would put the rod into a hole in the wall, then turned it like a key in a lock before moving it to another hole and repeating the action. The purpose of this was not clear to Walski. The second observation he made was that part of the ship's floor was covered with black birds. He thought he saw 10 in total, thinking they were either crows or rooks. They appeared to be alive. The birds seemed stunned, perhaps by the power of the alien craft, but Walski also thought the birds might not even be real. These birds were not real birds, but alien drones, perhaps, ready to be released into the area. Walski observed that they were not dead and only their heads and eyes were active. Perhaps they were simply in a low power mode before being activated for their surveillance mission. When Walski was dressed again, the aliens showed him the way out. Then, perhaps unexpectedly, he doffed his cap and bowed, saying goodbye. Likewise, the alien smiled or grimaced. The same lift took Walski down, but not all the way to the ground, but nearly. He had to jump. He returned to his horse and cart. Arriving there, he found that the mare had been grazing and had eaten quite a lot of grass while waiting. He sat down in his cart and looked at the UFO, where he just spent the most unusual moments of his life. Standing in the entrance of the object, he saw two or three of the entities watching him. His horse, now seemingly anxious to depart, galloped along the dirt track back toward home, and in about 10 minutes they arrived back at his farm. Walski hitched and cared for the mare before entering his home. No one was there except his wife. His sons would arrive a little later. When he told his family of his experience, they ran to find some neighbors, and then they went to the clearing. When Walski's sons and neighbors arrived at the clearing, they found it empty, but searching the site, they discovered traces that something had been there. They found imprints of strange footwear at three places, twice in the meadow, and one set near a curtain of trees that had masked the meadow from the road. 6 people, including 2 members of the Walski family, verified the presence of these footprints. The footprints were trapezoidal, almost rectangular in shape. The underneath part of the sole was convex, and the 2 long sides of the footprint went down into the soil to a depth of an inch or so. Each print was slightly longer than the average human footprint. His sons and neighbors also found corn stalks that had been uprooted and holes in the ground that gave the impression that something had been dug from it. And lastly, they found one bizarre artifact, a group of black feathers, all precisely the same length. So there was another incident in addition to Walski's encounter about 3/4 of a mile from where he had his encounter. 2 kids, ages 6 and 4, were playing in their backyard when they observed something extraordinary passing overhead. Their mother was preparing breakfast inside the house. The kids came to her moments later with a startling story. The kids told the mother that an aircraft resembling a bus had just flown over their farm at about the height of the barn. The children said the aircraft had only one window and that they had seen the pilot through it. The kids described the same craft from Walski's experience. The kids, for example, told them that the pilot's outfit was dark gray and that he had a green face. Walski, despite the support of his story, became frustrated with the constant reporting and questioning of his experience. He said, "You should know that I came to the conclusion that I should have kept my mouth shut about it, but my neighbors spread the rumors. Then it went nationwide. All evidence showed that he was not a drunk or a liar, and the debate about the truth of Volsky will likely never be answered satisfactorily." So, did the infamous 1978 abduction of Walski in Emilson, Poland, actually happen? It certainly had an impact on the community and the country as a whole, so much so that there still stands a sculpture commemorating the event today. And there it is. Hope you guys enjoyed that. My name is Al Barrows. This has been UFO Disclosure. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks.